Welcome to the Hope Collective, a podcast dedicated to shining a light on mental health, breaking down barriers, and sharing stories of resilience and recovery. I'm Melissa Owen, founder of Beacon for Hope Suicide Prevention, and your host. I'm passionate about creating a safe space for honest conversations, especially around topics that many find difficult to talk about. Today's episode is titled Suicide Prevention, Talking About the Taboo. We'll be discussing why suicide is such a difficult subject to address, dispelling common myths, and sharing ways to help those who may be struggling. We understand that these conversations can be heavy, but they are so important. Our goal is to foster understanding, empathy, and hope. Joining us today is Becky DeJesus. Becky, thank you for being here. Becky and I have known each other for several years. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how long it's been
Yeah,
now.
I don't know if time has ceased mattering in
Yes,
the world,
yes.
so I don't know.
Yes. So tell everybody how you came to be part of Beacon for Hope, what your role is, and kind of why you're here.
Okay. Well, when I worked at the orthodontist office, met you through your kids, and when you brought in a flyer for suicide prevention walk, and you were like, "Do you think the doctor would let me hang this up?" And I'm like, "Oh, we don't have to ask the doctor. I've got this. We'll put this up anytime you want to hang something like this up. Let's do it." And later on, you came to me with your idea that you were forming this nonprofit group to promote suicide prevention locally, where things would be and stay local. And you were like, I want you to help me. And I'm like, cool, because the minute you said something, I'm all in. Let's do this. And that was pre-COVID, several years. And we've been doing this ever since. I am the board president of Beacon for Hope and have been for a while.
Yes.
Very proud to be. And here we are.
Yes, awesome. And we love having you.
Yeah.
I think what a lot of people don't know is exactly what Beacon for Hope does.
Yeah.
There's a lot of confusion if we're a crisis line, if we're
Right. They think
crisis
we're like
services.
going out to save people on the brink or
Right.
offer therapy, which is not
Right,
what we do.
right. So, our mission is education, resources, support, and hope. So, we are trained in QPR training, which we come at the training from very different perspectives. So, which I
Yes.
have always valued, and I think the people that attend our trainings value too. I'm coming from the lost survivor, and you're coming from your own lived experience as well. And I think that people really connect when we are able to share our personal stories.
I think so. I think that's human connection. And I have not, okay, I've known people, but I never spoke to anyone about someone who had experienced loss.
Yes.
I am someone who nearly took my life more than once, um, decades ago. And so that brings me from the side of the person who's dealing with the feelings, the issues, and the world with that. So yeah, we do have a very different perspective between the two of us. I think it helps make the organization a little more well-rounded that
I think
way.
it does too. I think it does too.
So you said you decades ago you tried taking your own life.
Um, did not actually attempt, was on the brink of
Yeah,
attempting.
those ideations.
Oh, definitely suicidal
What
ideations.
was
Absolutely.
that brought you out of that?
Well, a few things. One was I did remember when I was younger, my one of my dad's cousins, her child had taken his life, and my dad was so angry with him because his cousin had had a lot of difficulties in her life, and dad felt like he was adding to her burden. Um, and also that's part of the grieving process too, is the anger. And he was so mad at this young man, and that always stuck in my mind. And um, I didn't want my dad to be mad at me for the rest of his life. My dad's an amazing, amazing person, and I didn't want to disappoint him that way. Also, it one of my options was a firearm that had been given to me by my parents for safety, for being not I lived in Wichita. I drove to and from Western Kansas and Wichita and had some issues with people on the highway. And
Mm.
I know I've been trained and taught how to use the firearm, but I could not let my dad live with that for the rest of his life. That, this happened with the instrument he gave me.
Mhm.
And I was also engaged um, to my now husband, and I couldn't bear him to be the guy whose fiance killed herself.
Mhm.
Um, so it wasn't me.
Mhm.
I wasn't living for me at that point in my life, but for the people in my life that I cared about. And yes, they cared about me,
Mhm.
but I cared so much about them that I could not go through with it. Um, still wanted to
Mhm.
off and on, but it kept me here. It kept me here till I could. I mean, it was years later when I got help,
Mhm.
external help, but it did what I needed till the next thing that I could find that I could use to keep going. So,
And since it happened decades ago, how hard was it or how easy was it to find resources for help? How hard was it for you to reach out and how difficult? I mean, could you talk to somebody? Could you
no,
talk about it?
no.
We're probably talking the 90s, maybe 80s,
Oh yeah,
80s.
90s, mid to late 90s when I
Yeah.
was in college.
Some back when nobody talked about it.
Right. No, nobody talked about it. There was one point I got in my car to go to class on a Wednesday in Wichita, and I got to the stoplight and go right to go to class, go left. I turned left and I drove back home 2.5 hours to Western Kansas. I just could not do it. And um, my parents came home for lunch and I'm sitting there in the living room. They're like, "What?" I'm just like, all I could say is I'm just having a really tough time and I needed to come home. I
Mhm.
couldn't speak about all those other thoughts in
Mhm.
my head, but it did get their attention.
Mhm. Yes.
Um, and then, stayed home, ate dinner, just kind of hung out with my family, and then went back to class the next morning.
Mhm.
But, but there weren't like, there was a counselor on campus. It is a small college, but he was more of, yeah, he works in the psychology department. He's the guy.
Mhm.
There wasn't like a counseling center of
Okay.
any sort or
Mhm.
anything. And I went, and that person, I talked a little bit to that person just about some frustration, some not feeling like me. And uh, his reaction was not encouraging to keep talking. We'll put
Mm.
it that way. And I think that was just because it was someone I knew too well and it
Mhm.
was not a good fit,
Right.
which it often isn't. But there, I didn't know where else to go. So
Right.
I
And I
just
think
kind of,
And I think that's the problem even now is people don't know where to go because they don't want to be a burden to somebody because everybody
right,
has their own issues that they're dealing with, their own problems and their stressors. And trying to convey when you say to somebody, "Hey, if you need something, call me." But to be sure that you can be that person too if they reach out and
right.
and place that call or text or, "Hey, I need you,"
Because
or
that's
whatever.
also a difficult place to be. I've been there
Yes.
as well.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes. So I've noticed in the work we've done with the high school during COVID,
Hmm.
especially when we were invited in, the difference, how us growing up being very close in age and how definitely didn't talk about mental wellness in school.
No, no,
When the counselor did visit, it wasn't ever anything about social emotional um, that I can
no,
recall.
no.
Um, but
Might have been anti-bullying. That
Yes,
might have
yeah,
been
or
something.
or it was
Don't
the
do drugs.
don't do drugs. Yes, that was the big campaign. Yes.
Don't do
Yeah.
drugs in the 80s.
Yes.
No anti-bullying in the
Yep, that's
90s.
Hmm.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. So those were
Yep.
the major campaigns and such, but the questions that we were getting
Yeah.
were kind of some were devastating that teens were struggling so hard and they were isolated
Hmm.
and how do you equip them with the tools and
Right.
then coming out of covid seeing such a rise in teens and young adults that are struggling and everybody else struggling
Hmm.
about how to integrate back into quote normal life and they've never struggled before, so they don't know these feelings that they're feeling, and they don't know
Mhm.
who to reach out to and stuff. But what I've noticed is more people now are willing to talk about it. They
Yeah.
want somebody to
Mhm.
connect with that might
Absolutely.
feel the way they feel. And I know you've experienced it. I've experienced it. Kenny, I know you've experienced it too, where when they learn part of your story, there's like this relief in them that they can share part of their story and they can
Yeah.
connect with somebody, even if it's a
Mhm.
stranger.
I use my story all the time on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for the audience that you guys don't, we're just our first podcast, so you probably don't know who we are. But I'm a police officer during the day, and using my stories of with people struggling that I meet on the street is a good way to build rapport.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're not, and they can tell when you're, if you never experience what they're experiencing, that you're full of crap
Mm-hmm.
if you're lying about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they could tell that, you're genuine. You're like, hey, look, this is what I dealt with it by myself. Don't need to deal with it by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the resources that you can go. There's people that will listen to you that want to hear what you have to say
Absolutely.
and are not going to judge you for what you're saying. So
Right. And that's it, the judgment.
Right. So yeah, when I was a teenager, um, small town, small farm town,
Mm-hmm.
um, we didn't talk about it because it wasn't an illness. It seemed like it was more of like a personal failing, where you needed to suck it up
Mm-hmm.
and just deal with things.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't be that, of course, what could be that bad? I had a great life. My parents, um, married happily. There's four of us kids, all, there's our family was stable,
Mm-hmm.
happy, nothing was wrong
Mm-hmm.
there. So obviously my life couldn't be that bad.
Right.
Why are you not just living your best life,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
suck it up and just deal with things? You're just having a bad moment. But if you had a stronger personality, or if you weren't so weak,
Mm-hmm.
nobody ever said that,
Right.
but that's just kind of the general
Mm-hmm.
feel of
Mm-hmm.
the reaction because we didn't talk about those things.
Right.
Um,
you have a sense that people, even though they have no idea what you're struggling with, but you get that, I don't want to call it paranoia, but like everybody's looking at me,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a failed perfectionist is what I like to call it. But back in the day, I was very much a goody two shoes, follow the rules, get the A's, do all the right things
Mm-hmm.
to make everybody happy.
Mm-hmm.
And if I did all of these things, everything would be good. And obviously, that was not the case. I was getting the A's. I was a well behaved kid,
Mm-hmm.
and things fell apart anyway.
Right.
So, but that drive for perfection is always a difficult thing to deal with too, that
Mm-hmm.
leads into mental issues
Mm-hmm.
as well,
Yes.
of course.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think it's been I love how open teens are
Mhm.
and how inquisitive they are. I've noticed when we table, especially at our high school, that they'll come up to the table and they'll ask, "What is this all about?" And
Mhm.
as soon as you describe we have resources, here's some life-saving resources that you can access 24/7, they're confidential. They start
Mhm.
asking questions. Like I remember one young man said that he had lost his uncle and he wanted to know how to support his dad,
Mhm.
who had just lost,
Mhm.
his brother and stuff. And so I think we have shielded, we grew up very shielded from the negative.
Yes.
And because there wasn't a lot of education, there wasn't a lot of
Mhm.
empirical evidence about, hey, it's a chemical imbalance,
Right.
it's not you're a bad person and you made poor choices and
You're not weak.
right.
Mhm.
Yes, it's not a choice for you to have anxiety and depression and
Right.
our and
And if we
our
had a choice, why would we choose this?
right. Yes.
Honestly, but
Mhm.
yeah, I've got 3 kids. Your kids are just a little younger
Mhm.
than mine.
Mhm.
So early, mid early 20s into
Mhm.
early or late teens, and I don't know what changed in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if some of us just decided we had to talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
or how the focus started with mental health help and that kind of thing. But kids nowadays are so much more aware
Yes.
of what we're talking about than
Mm-hmm.
I would have been at
Yes.
that same age.
Yes.
Now I would have been very interested if somebody
Mm-hmm.
had come in and talked about it,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
um, they seem to know. I don't know if they're more in tune with their mental issues or if
Mm-hmm.
they just have the vocabulary a little more to put with it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know where it came from, but it's a good change,
Yes, I
I
agree.
think.
I
Yes.
think people are starting to talk about it because,
We
you know,
could not talk about it anymore,
Right.
almost.
yeah, I
Well,
mean,
Yeah.
so many people, especially since COVID, have taken their own lives,
Yes.
right.
and
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I talked about these things in front of my kids,
Mm-hmm.
not like a lecture or anything,
Right.
but if something came up or if they noticed things, I would let them know, yeah, I'm having a bad
Mm-hmm.
mental
Sure.
day. And
Right. Yeah.
never until they were older, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't sit down and be like, yeah, you're in a family that has mental health
Mm-hmm.
history,
Mm-hmm.
including depression, anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
maybe a little OCD over here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if you don't, you also need to know about heart disease
That's
and
right.
cancer
Exactly.
risks. And
Yes.
that's just kind of one of those things you need to
Mm-hmm.
let your kids know about. And the more normal you make it around them, then the easier it is for them to ask questions or to maybe understand why, this week mom didn't cook anything
Mm-hmm.
and dad been getting pizza and burgers on his way home from work,
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, talking, just
Yes.
vocalizing and letting people know that, yeah, you're struggling.
And I think, I always joke that, suicide and suicide prevention is just so open in my house since my daughter was in the 6th grade because she's just been around the work
Hmm.
and learning what that means, and having to talk to my own kids about, what exactly does that mean, and making them understand, but also then educating them that, hey, she was only 12 years old at the time,
Hmm.
but you can notice things in your peers and your friends. And I always think of the example where she had gone to, I believe it was the 6th grade dance, it was the back to school dance. And she hadn't been there probably 15 minutes and she was calling. So, of course, I'm already nervous that she's at a middle
Right.
school dance and now she's calling, something's wrong. And, my
Hmm.
helicopter mom comes out in me and stuff. And she conveyed that her very close friend had just made the statement, I wish I would have never been born. And she's like, and I knew I needed to call you. What do
Hmm.
I do next?
Wow.
So, if my 12-year-old at the time knew what to listen for, she
Hmm.
knew she needed to go get an adult and then everything was okay,
Hmm.
and then come to find out that her friend was struggling and she's gotten the help that she needs and she's still, dealing with, her
Hmm.
issues, but has the coping mechanisms
Right.
to be able
Hmm.
to do that. And her dad has the coping mechanisms too to help her, which is great,
Yeah. Very
but
important.
just not being afraid of the conversation because that's a hard conversation to
Right.
have.
Well, and I know lots of people, the first time we tabled at the mall
Mm-hmm.
together, I remember um, there were some mall walkers around and people had stopped and looked at our table. And I don't remember what we were there for. There
Mm-hmm.
were other people
Mm-hmm.
tabling, but an older woman had looked at our table to read what it was about. And she read Beacon for Hope Suicide Prevention and she physically flinched,
I remember that. Yes.
physically flinched.
Yes.
And so something
Mm-hmm.
was there,
Mm-hmm.
but she probably had never been able to talk
Right.
much about it
Right.
either. And I think there was a lot of people who are afraid if you talk about it, that you give it permission,
Mm-hmm.
that it's something that people might not have thought about it before you said the word, and then
Right.
you gave them the idea, and that's why they went and did it. And
Right.
that is not
Right. And
how it
that,
works at all.
right. Right. And the myth that people who are having suicidal ideation that they don't talk about it. Yes, they do. They may not be talking directly that, I want to take my life, but they are expressing it, in different ways too. They are talking about it in different ways. It's just recognizing,
Mhm.
what they're saying, how they're saying it, their nonverbals, their actions and those types of things, and not being afraid just to ask, are you okay? I've noticed this, you
Like
know.
we were talking about that earlier. Struggling with this, like depression or anxiety, when you know yourself and how you react and how
Mhm.
you feel, you can recognize it
Mhm.
without them even saying anything to you, just
Right.
by their body language,
Mhm.
that they're,
Mhm.
if they're constantly looking tired, coming into work and not self-isolating and stuff
Right.
like that, you it's easy to spot when
Mhm.
hey, I used to do that. Like, I think, I
Mhm.
talked to you, Melissa, when I was going through my thing. I would
Mhm.
just find a spot in the city and hide there
Yep.
and just pray I wouldn't get a call.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the anxiety that I had, not from the big, the violent calls, but somebody's parked in front of my mailbox, go deal with it,
Mhm.
spiked every time I got one of those. And
Mhm.
and I couldn't understand why. And so I would
Yep.
just pray that I would get a call and just
Mhm.
try to survive. But now that I've been through that, and I can see it in other officers when they're struggling.
Oh
I can
yeah.
see it
Mhm.
in people when they're struggling.
Yeah.
I go, so
Yeah. Yeah. And then sometimes you have to have your eyes opened from someone else about somebody, because maybe you're really close to it and it just is slow, because that happened in my family,
Oh.
and
Mhm.
had to have it pointed out about one of my sons who has given me permission to discuss it
Okay.
before. But he was struggling really hard with his ADHD
Mhm.
while in elementary school, was able to deal with it okay,
Mhm.
unmedicated. But when he got to middle school, apparently he was having more struggles. Um, he knew what he needed to get done for school and everything, but he could not do it. He could not figure out how to do it.
Mm.
Um, and he had vocalized self harm thoughts to a friend who let a brother know, who let me know. And then
Mhm.
we got him in to help,
Yeah.
um, and medicated.
did he hide it
Mm.
well, or did you
Yes,
overdo it?
yes, he both.
Yeah,
Um,
my daughter, same thing. She hit it well, but then
yeah,
at the same time, I didn't want to believe that something
right.
could be wrong.
Right.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, because I mean, he was not ever necessarily a straight A student,
Mhm.
so his grades didn't concern me so
Mhm.
much. Um, and going into middle school, such a hard time
Oh,
for
definitely.
everybody,
Mhm.
that I expected some differences and stuff, but until somebody said, no, he's really struggling. And I
Mhm.
asked him and I said, is this true? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, let's fix it.
Right.
Let's do what we
Mhm.
need to do.
Mhm.
He's doing great now. Still ADHD and stuff. That's all right. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Learning some coping
Yes.
strategies and what works for him, and
Mhm.
what works for one person doesn't always work for another. But when you can bounce ideas off, and I think the internet honestly has helped that a lot, as
Yes.
being able to talk to. Sometimes the anonymity of the internet is not a great thing,
Right.
but sometimes it really just, you can talk about things that you wouldn't necessarily talk about to your friends. And maybe
Right.
that's where some of the change came in, because we talked to people that didn't have faces
Mhm.
about things and realized that, yeah, other people are dealing with the same stuff. It's
Right.
not just you being a weirdo.
Mhm.
Um, but,
And
you
it's
know,
interesting what they're struggling with. That's what really
mhm,
got me during COVID, um, was the students that had a lot of different ages in the high school, but had a lot of similarities, and asking questions like, how do I stay motivated? Because that was impacting their anxiety and their depression.
mhm,
How can I eat better? And I think one of the myths that people really focus on is, oh, if somebody has suicidal ideation, it's directly linked to a mental illness. Well,
Right.
that's a risk factor, yes.
Yeah.
But there's all
But-
these outside entities
Yeah,
that negatively are
yeah.
impacting people.
He wasn't depressed,
Mhm.
but he didn't know what to do.
Right.
And he couldn't see a way through where any success or improvement could happen at the
Mhm.
time with what he was doing.
Right.
It wasn't because of depression. It
Mhm.
was something else entirely.
Mhm.
He's creative, right? He's an actor.
He's very
Yes,
creative.
very creative.
Yeah.
Creative, and that a lot of that the creative communities they struggle
Struggle,
with
Mhm.
that
yeah.
because
Mhm.
it's it's what they're doing is being judged by other people, and you know even
Mhm.
though they might not be seeking the validation from people, but you
But
know
that
they
it's
kind
still
of rest
there.
it
Yes.
kind of you know if
Mhm.
you know the validation kind of is important because you won't if you don't get if you're not good you're not going to move on, you know, and
Right.
so that's hard, you know,
Mhm.
and I see it on myself when I'm doing video, you know, and
Mhm.
editing and stuff like that. It's just rough, you know.
Mhm.
But
Well, nobody will criticize you the way you criticize you. That's
Yeah,
for
and-
Isn't
sure.
that the truth? Yes,
Yeah.
we're our own worst critic.
Mhm.
and you
Yes.
find yourself like you said you're a perfectionist, and um when I worked at the radio station, my general manager used to tell me or tell us all that perfection is the enemy of progress, you know, because you can't
Mhm.
ever nobody can become no matter how much they
Yeah.
studied one issue or not, you know, or other, you can't be totally perfect at it.
Mhm.
There's going to be some kind of errors,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
but you learn from that every time. And
Oh,
Right.
definitely.
but
Yes.
perfection's always going to elude us, you know.
Yes.
Mhm.
It
But
is.
it's still going to be there going, you
Mm.
can do this.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Almost.
Right. So
Almost.
sucks
Yes.
to be you.
Definitely. Definitely.
Got to
Definitely.
tell your brain to shut up.
You do, and I think that's hard to turn your brain off.
Well, she saw me earlier. I was
Oh yes, he's like, I'm overthinking. He's like, I don't think you're overthinking like I am, and I'm like, well, no, not the things that you're overthinking. I'm over here with a whole other set of overthinking going on, you know.
Yeah.
And
We're
so,
overthinking different
right,
subjects.
yeah, you know, we're
Yeah.
not both concentrating on, you know, the one thing, but it's very, I get lost in my own head sometimes, you know, when I start like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to do, you know, I have it envisioned a certain way, and then when it's not being executed that way, I know nobody else notices. And I say this with every event that we do. Nobody, and you're always like, nobody's gonna notice. Nobody's
right.
gonna, but I see it.
Yeah.
I see it. Nobody knows that
even
this was
if-
supposed to happen at that
If
time.
something happens here, the rest things will still happen.
They will, yes.
You just got to
Yes.
keep breathing.
Mhm.
That's the important part. And then events will go.
Mhm.
Even if it's not the way you envisioned it.
Right.
It'll be okay.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. See,
And
that's
it's
why we
turned out
work
okay.
well together too, because
That's right.
A couple years ago at our event at the Granada, I remember when I was just freaking out because
Oh,
I
yes.
could not get the video to render out.
Couldn't get it to render
Oh,
out,
no.
and then the
Ah,
projector wouldn't work, and the whole theater was dark,
Yeah.
waiting for it to come on, and I was like, it's fine.
I don't
It-
think I've ever
it-
experienced anxiety like that since then
Yeah.
because everybody was there for, you know,
Right.
Uh-huh.
for this and
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to let anybody down. And then
Mm-hmm.
that was,
Mm-hmm.
and
oh,
it happened and it was great.
And it was great.
Yeah.
Everything positive came from it. You
Yeah.
know,
yeah.
really did. Yeah.
Yeah,
And more
but-
ideas came from it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the
Exactly.
great thing is more ideas of, ooh, I really like that. So let's do something else where we can reach people.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. I know that I put too much on my plate, and I know that. But
Mhm.
over the last few years, COVID really had to stop us in our tracks because we weren't able to do anything.
Mhm.
When we were really gung ho in
Oh, yeah.
2019, my goodness, we were everywhere.
we were
everywhere. It was exhausting.
Rolling.
Yes, and so much going on, and then to go from that to nothing.
Mhm.
And it was, I remember the event we had, it was at the mall again, and it was in April of 2021, was the first time the mall did an event. And it was like it's more like a resource fair thing.
Probably.
And I can recall the excitement of community members coming up to see us again and to share their stories,
Mhm.
you know, and to share that, you know, we had different populations that came up to us that were more open to talk about it, which was wonderful, and to be able to give resources to. But from 21 then being invited to the school because they wanted to have, the support for their kids
Mhm.
and how, we
For the
could support them.
students,
Yes, for the
absolutely.
students
Mhm.
and such. And now we're finally back into the full swing
Mhm.
um, of things. But learning to say no without guilt is one of the hardest things, no matter what age group that you're in. And
Mhm.
I think that feeling of disappointment of, oh gosh, I've done it in the past, but I just can't right now. But so either you totally stress out and
Mhm. Let the
um,
guilt eat at you.
yes, you do let the guilt, or you go the other, you're upset with yourself, and that sort of thing. I think learning how to say no when your plate is full,
Mhm.
or if your social battery is worn totally down,
Right.
because it happens with everybody.
Mhm.
I like to be a social butterfly, but there are times, depending on the conversations, I'm exhausted by the end of the day because of the mental taxing.
Mhm.
And most of us at our jobs, by the time and all the interactions,
Mhm.
depending on what they are,
Oh yeah, I work with people all day.
yes.
I'm sure interact
Yeah,
with
you
people
have
all
no
day.
idea what your day is going to be being
Right.
out there
Oh,
as
you
an
just want
officer.
to experience total quiet on
Mm.
busy days, you know?
I
Mhm.
hibernate a lot.
Mhm.
I will just not go places,
Yes.
or I will ignore my phone,
Mhm.
get my book out, turn on some
Mhm.
music, and just
Mhm.
don't want to leave the house, don't want to deal with
Yes.
anybody that's not right there,
Right.
and for days,
Mhm.
days. And
Mhm.
especially since COVID, I find myself doing it more. I
Mhm.
just like the quiet more. And I
Yep.
don't know if that's because I'm old now. Um,
Seasoned, not old.
well, I'm just saying after
Vintage.
that.
Yeah, vintage. Yes, vintage. I like
Vintage.
that.
Just a little faded.
Uh-huh.
Maybe
Just a little faded.
maybe a couple holes, but I'm still good. But I treasure that
Mhm.
not having to be on
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
thing, and so and it's more work to turn on
Uh-huh.
every year,
Mhm.
because work me and real me are not the same people
Yes.
necessarily,
Yes.
but um,
The masks we wear,
oh,
right? I
absolutely,
mean, the
yeah.
mask that we all wear when we're hiding, when we're going through something, whether it
Hmm.
be emotional or physical, and you're just trying to keep that, best foot forward. I know when we've gone out to lunch before, I'll be like, okay, I've got to put on my customer service voice, because you see somebody in the community and you want to
Hmm.
acknowledge and be friendly, and stuff, but you're going through something and you just don't have it in you to really engage because we
Hmm.
all wear the masks, and it's how do we make it okay to take the mask off, by showing support, resource that it's okay to talk
Right.
about whatever you're struggling, just talk about
Yeah,
it.
and when they come up and say, "Hey, how's it going?" You're like, "I'm having a rough day,
Yeah.
but it'll be
Mhm.
okay eventually."
Mhm.
Instead of just like, "Oh,
Oh
everything's
yeah, it's
great."
fine.
Mhm.
I'm good.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
mhm,
I'm fine doesn't live in my house, and
right?
he's over there with, it's good. I'm like, oh no,
Mhm.
no you're
Yeah.
not.
So we're talking the other day about how the language is different with men and women, it's
Mhm.
I'm
Oh,
fine,
mhm.
Mhm.
or it's fine,
Mhm.
Yeah.
for women, and then for men it's I'm good, or
Mhm.
I'm okay,
Mhm.
or it
Mhm.
is what it is.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, and being masculine is a whole different set of issues and
Mhm.
hurdles to go through, I'm sure,
Well,
with mental health and talking about things, because it was difficult enough as a girl,
Mhm.
but we're supposed to be all about our feelings and talking about it and things, and you guys have a whole different expectation, whether it's realistic or real or not. It's definitely a thing that
no, definitely. I mean, most men, I mean, will feel like we're problem solvers. I mean,
Mhm.
and especially if you're in the law enforcement, you're a problem solver.
Mhm.
absolutely, yeah.
And um, our problems we solve on our own, and we solve other people's problems. Like most men will think, I have to be strong for my family. I have to,
Mhm.
and that's the problem with a lot of, when you hit that wall and everything, it feels like everything is just falling apart around you and you're not in control of anything anymore. That's where
Mhm.
you get a lot of men checking out, and,
Mhm.
Mhm.
but for men, it's different, if we're failing at what our main purpose is, that strikes us pretty hard,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, because
Yeah, I mean, when the expectations put on you are a protector, um, provider, you know, worrying about the monetary aspects of the family, even if you're not the sole provider,
Mhm.
um, yeah, that's a different set of expectations that comes down. And then culturally, that can be different too,
Mhm.
um, depending on how you were raised, how your family was. Um, because I was raised by very stubborn German farmers,
Mm.
but I don't know that that has anything on how someone's raised in their masculinity necessarily in some, maybe Hispanic cultures or maybe even some Asian cultures.
Mhm.
I'm not as familiar. I grew up in Western Kansas and
Mhm.
it's a very white place.
Mhm.
Um, there are a lot of Hispanic people there too,
Mhm.
also more now than when I grew up, even. But one of the things I enjoy about being here is just more people of different backgrounds and
Absolutely. Yeah.
colors. And
Yeah.
my kids went to a high school with a lot of
Mhm.
diversity
Yep. Mhm.
for Kansas,
Mhm.
I think, compared to where I went.
Mhm.
And I love that for
Mhm.
them. And I think they're much more, I don't know, I learn more from my kids some days, I think, than
Yes.
they learn from me,
Yes.
for sure.
Mhm.
And being open to that is great, but there's a whole lot of things you try not to repeat with your kids that happened with you, and
Mhm.
sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're
Mhm.
not,
Yes.
and
Yes.
having a dialogue helps
It
with
does.
that entirely.
Mhm.
But
And it's hard to open that dialogue sometimes, especially but I know as a parent that, when you see your child struggling, it's instant fear.
mm,
You have
absolutely,
that
my
instant fear.
heart literally stopped in my
Yes.
chest.
Yes. And it's okay. What do we do next? You know everything that you're supposed to do because, this is your passion. You're educated on it but
Hmm.
when it's your own or somebody you're extremely close to and it's like, oh,
Right.
you can't think.
Hmm.
You can't think. And so I think it's important for, people to know that that's totally normal. I mean,
Oh
honestly, it's
yeah,
normal. And to bring
absolutely.
other people or another person that you really trust to help you have that conversation.
Oh yeah,
Don't do it alone, you know.
absolutely. Yeah. And it's not a one-time
No,
conversation
it's not.
either.
No.
You still need to be talking, although not just the, are you sure you're okay today? It has
Exactly.
to be a conversation,
Yes.
not a,
yeah, we all
Yes.
we all
yeah.
want that. Are you doing okay? And then yeah, I'm
Yeah.
doing
Mhm.
fine, and
Hmm.
okay, let's not talk about it no more.
Right.
Right.
My
Right.
my youngest daughter, would she talks about her feelings, and she would always give us crap because when growing up, we never talked about our feelings. I'm like, I thought we did, but I guess we didn't. But
Mhm. Mhm.
so she's
Hmm.
always honest about talking about her feelings, and
Um, Although it kept me alive.
Mhm.
Once my oldest was born, I was like, well, I can't do that to him.
Mhm.
And I did. I made a vow. I was like, I'm not leaving you.
Mhm.
so I was going to ask you that. You said that earlier when you were having these ideations that you didn't do it because you were living for somebody else.
Hmm.
I know you just said that you couldn't do that to your son, but when did you
Hmm.
start living for yourself?
That's a good question. I was in my 30s before I sought any kind of professional help again. Um, a friend of mine was going to a nurse practitioner who does medication management and has done a lot of studying about mental health, and that's where her specialty is.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'd kind of like to go talk to her, I think,
Mhm.
sometime.
Mhm.
And so I did. And my friend and I started having these quarterly self care trips to Topeka. We'd both go talk to the lady, make sure everything's going good. And then we'd go do what we called our retail therapy
Yes.
and had some lunch together. And
Mhm.
Um, it was very therapeutic, actually, for
Yeah.
me. I miss being able to do that. We both work full time now, and things get in the way. But it was a necessary step. But I was in my 30s, maybe closer to 40, before I was like, this is okay to do for me.
Yes.
Um, and it's still a struggle. It is. It's still a struggle, but uh, I keep working at it. But my kids are grown.
Yep.
They still need me, but they don't need me on a
Mhm.
daily basis to make sure they survive in
Right.
the world. But I've got grandbaby now.
Yes.
But I don't it's about them, but it's not about them
Right.
now. So, but it's a good question because, like I said, I'm still working out who I am with not being a mom that's being active in her very busy teenagers' lives and stuff.
Right.
It's a different it's a pivot,
Mhm.
and I'm glad I had done a lot of work prior on me beforehand, because I think it would have been a struggle, more of a struggle than it is. But yeah, something I still work on every day,
Yeah.
and I'm very thankful for medication too. But yeah, and what about you? How were you able to do that? Are you still working on that?
Um, for me, it was a hormonal imbalance.
Mhm.
So my testosterone was way out of whack.
Yeah.
And once I got on treatment for that,
Mhm.
it felt
I have
great.
also had hormone work done that
Mhm.
has helped, and I had really low vitamin D,
Oh, yes.
and I have to
Mhm.
take vitamin D daily for the rest of my life because I was doing real good for a while, and I was like, "Oh, good, I got it all leveled out."
And then you stopped taking it, didn't
Yeah,
you?
and then my doctor was like, yeah, you need to take that forever." I'm like, "Okay, that's what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am."
It's a good idea. Yeah.
Yep,
Mhm.
but checking those vitamin levels and the hormone levels, and of course, that requires money and
Yes.
insurance often, and,
Yep.
um
Yeah. For me, it's pellets is what I went to with
did you go
Doc.
see Dr. Ruxton or
No,
someone
Doctor
else?
Waters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is he the one downtown?
Yeah. Liberty MD.
Yeah,
So
okay,
yeah.
I get pellets with Dr. Ruxton
Yeah. So
every 3 months.
yeah, and it's not covered by insurance,
Nope,
but
nope, it's
I don't
not.
know why.
Yeah, it's not FDA approved or
Mm.
something probably,
But FDA approval. Don't get me on a. I'm not gonna go that way. Let's just say if you
It's
had enough money, anything could be approved now.
yeah, yeah, and while we talk about resources and where to find them, part of the problem is there are not enough
Right.
resources,
Right.
and there's not enough affordable resources. Although I know we have at least two places here in town that do work with a sliding scale. Getting that information to people is also difficult, but there's waits, and I mean, even just getting to facilities to go. Working where I do at CareArc now, the difficulty just with transportation for people, the things I've learned, it's humbled me a little bit and
Yeah.
opened my eyes. Not that I wasn't there already thinking we need universal health care. I know this isn't supposed to be like political, but it is because there's no funding. There's I mean, there's so many barriers in place, and I wish I could remove all the barriers and get more help to
Yes.
people and make it more readily available. And I don't know how to fix that yet. I'm
Right.
still working through that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as I can fix the whole world, everything will be great.
Great.
In the meantime, we just keep chugging along.
That's right.
But
That's right.
You can do that, but if you do, you'll be a very rich person.
Yes, you will.
right, and then I would give it all away to help all the people because
Yeah.
I'm doing okay. Just
Yes.
so, but yeah. But I mean, that's also part of the discussion. It is, it's a lot easier to work on your mental health when you're not worrying about how you're going to heat the house
That's right.
or
Yes.
um, where your kid's next meal's coming from
Mm-hmm.
or what kind of job you might have tomorrow
Mm-hmm.
because all of a sudden it's gone today.
Right.
So yeah, mental health is talking about it and medication and sometimes counseling and being open, but there are monetary and other issues that go along with it that we try to work with other agencies to
Mm-hmm.
direct people
Yes.
for help, but I just wish there was more
Yes.
that we
That's
could
one
do.
thing we talked about earlier, Kenny, was the different facets that are impacting people in a negative way. So yeah, job insecurity,
Mhm.
not food insecurity, a lot of things that a lot of us take for granted because we're
Mhm.
able to, we're secure in our jobs and we have the funds always to, get
Mhm.
the food that we need and people not knowing the resources who, struggle,
Right. Or
from time to
when
time.
Abundant Harvest has a bunch of things,
Mhm.
but you don't have a
You don't have
car
a car
and
to
you
get
live on
there.
the other side of town
Right.
and it's 2 degrees outside.
Right.
And
Right.
it's 3 feet
And
of snow out. 6 feet
Exactly.
of snow.
yeah, and
Yes. Yes.
and LCAT's not running.
Mhm. Yeah.
I
Mhm.
mean, we're lucky to have LCAT because
Yes.
there are towns that don't have any kind of public transportation
Right.
available.
Right.
But I mean, still, it's if you're reliant on your friend whose car is kind of a piece of crap anyway to
Mhm.
get where you're going, and if it works that day, cool. If your friend's not feeling it,
Mhm.
or yeah, and I'm sure you see it on in your job too, just the difficulties in place
Oh,
that
yeah.
make it hard to get help for people
Mhm.
that aren't just the availability of the help.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so if anybody has solutions to fix the world,
Yes.
we're open to listening.
Definitely.
Hmm.
Definitely. Yes. Yes. So let's talk about resources.
Okay.
So we are very much a promoting 24/7 resources. When we first started, we didn't really know a lot of what the
Oh yeah,
resources
we were
were.
learning
Oh yeah, we were
right
learning as
along.
we went. So
We still are.
right. So, we identify local resources and then, finding out that unfortunately a crisis doesn't happen between 8 and 5 Monday through Friday, and that was the biggest thing. And what I was noticing was Sundays.
Sundays, yeah.
Sundays are our busiest days of getting private messages on Facebook that people are struggling and they're struggling.
Hmm.
For the anxiety of the week starting, and just all these different fears that people had and where can we direct them?
Hmm.
And it's even worse if you're in a job that you just cannot stand working in.
Right.
Sundays are the
Yeah.
worst.
Yes. Yeah,
Hmm.
that dread.
Um,
Yeah.
or if you're not certain, you don't have a total grasp on that job and
Mhm.
you're afraid to mess up and
Mhm. Mhm.
you
Hmm.
know.
Yes. So we always, give out the 988 number
Hmm.
is, so 988, you can call it, you can text it, you can get online with it because we also know that different populations like to communicate in different ways, which
Right.
is great.
Hmm.
988 here in Kansas, they have the Hey HQ, which is the teen line, which is something new that started this
Okay.
past year, which is great, where teens can call and they're connected to a trained teen, which is wonderful.
Hmm.
For veterans, we have, press one where they're speaking to their call gets routed to a VA and you're talking to a veteran.
Hmm.
So you
So,
saying this is what, like if somebody calls Hope Beacon,
mhm.
those are on there? Or
We can give them the resource
Yes,
to call for
yes,
that.
yes.
We don't offer that service
Right.
ourselves, but we can direct people
Yes.
to it.
And then there's the crisis text line, which is
Hmm.
popular, the 741-741 that anybody can text 24/7. And I think a lot of people are afraid to call because of fear of, law enforcement,
Showing
because
up at their
yeah,
door
because of the stigma for years attached to it. They come, they arrest you, because
for
you're
your
having
own good.
right, yeah, to protect everybody, but that's
Hmm.
just not the case. I always encourage people to call 988 to see what it's like.
Yeah, call
experience
when
what
you're
it's
not
like.
in crisis.
Yeah, when you're not
Yeah.
in crisis, and you don't have to be suicidal to call. That's so important, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you need to talk through something, if you're worried about somebody, that
Mhm.
that trained volunteer is there
Yeah.
to
If
help
you're
you
concerned
navigate
about
that.
helping a friend that you don't
Yes.
know where to go.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, that's always the go-to resource. If it's something critical and you can get them to the ER, take them to the ER, and they are trained there and they have their steps on how they're going to help somebody, or if you need to call 911.
Mhm.
I've done wellness checks before on people where, like I haven't heard from such and such, and it feels like you're like getting somebody in trouble almost because you're calling the police to go to their house, but
Mhm.
it's because I would rather that person be angry at me than the alternative
Right.
that, I
That
deployed
they're dead.
officers to
Mhm.
their house. I just want
Yeah.
to make sure you're okay because nobody's
Mhm.
heard from you in 2 days, which is unusual.
Right.
And such. And
Yeah.
so teaching and educating people that that's okay to do. I mean, law enforcement, I'm
Mhm.
sure Kenny would rather go do a wellness check than have to be working something else at that same.
It would be nice that I mean that is a lot simpler, especially if you can get them help. If you can relate to them and they can open up to you, and then and let them know that hey, just because you might go talk to somebody doesn't mean you're going to go to a state hospital. Not every police interaction with suicidal ideations or suicidal subjects ends up in the hospital. You will talk to a person that is trained in that, but that doesn't mean that you're automatically going to go. And if it's a voluntary, um, for us, if you say yeah, I want to voluntarily go, then our once we get you to the hospital, our involvement ends, and it doesn't. You don't have to have the stress of police hanging over your shoulder. Our involvement ends once you get to the hospital. So it is a discussion that most of the time we have to have with them. Just because you're going to talk to somebody doesn't mean you're automatically going to be hospitalized.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
hmm And I know individuals I've talked to, it's the fear of their friend being mad
Mhm.
at them.
Oh yeah.
The fear of
Well,
losing the friendship, the relationship,
mhm.
whatever it might
Well,
be.
especially when you're middle school, high school,
Mhm.
your life revolves around your friends
Yes.
and um yeah, your peers affects everything.
Yes, that's right.
And wanting to yeah, not get on the bad side of
Mhm.
someone whose opinion you value
Mhm.
is hard.
It's
It can
very
be
hard.
really hard to do. And yeah, it's being able to find somebody that you
Mhm.
trust to
Mhm.
help you out is so important.
And then to have that somebody supportive, especially if they have gone to hospitalization. I know we've had calls on this on kind of tips to how to reintegrate, especially when it's a student of any age, how to reintegrate them back into the classroom where classmates, some classmates know why the student is gone, and not being that helicopter administrator or, whatever, for that person, just allowing that student to be. So just checking in, absolutely, we should be checking in on each other all the time anyway.
Mhm.
I will sometimes just send out a text to somebody I haven't talked to and we're like, hey, hey, I'm a bad friend, just I'm wrapped up in my own stuff, I wanted to make sure you're doing okay,
Yeah.
what's been going on,
Mhm.
that sort of thing, and just that
Yeah.
connection to that, hey, I'm still here,
Mhm.
if you need me.
Yeah, yeah, I
um,
miss you. I haven't seen you for a while. Let's go have
exactly,
lunch
yeah.
someday.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
because I can recall our very first masquerade ball that we did, and there was a young lady there who, at that time, she was a cashier at Dillon's, and we had talked with her at a tabling event downtown
Mhm.
prior, and I remember us talking, and she shared her struggles, and such, and how she was in a much better place, you know. Talking at the masquerade ball, but she told me, she said, that day you talked to me downtown, she's like, you saved my life that day. And it was just listening, just listening and just validating that she was not alone in how she was feeling in her experiences too.
Right.
And that, yeah, there is a fear of reaching out and, connecting with a therapist. If that, I know that was the route she was going, was, afraid for counseling, although she knew she could benefit from it, but that fear of being judged and all of that. And she had started and she saw that, hey, it was working, but just
Yeah.
having that
Well, and
initial person to talk to.
so many times people don't feel heard.
Yes.
Um, Listening is so important. Sometimes that's what all it takes
Mm-hmm.
is just a sympathetic ear and
Yes.
shoulder and listening to listen,
Mm-hmm.
not to fix, not
Yes.
to give your side, not
Mm-hmm.
just to validate
Mm-hmm.
their experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that, yeah, I get it. I've
Yeah.
been there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
And
nothing like being able to, we call it brain dumping. I just need to brain dump on you. I just need you to listen,
mhm,
or, my best friend, I'm like, I just need you to agree with everything I'm saying right now because I'm so upset, even if I sound very irrational in my thinking right now because I'm upset about this one thing.
mhm,
But, she and I have a thing where she read a study where you need 8 minutes. You need 8 minutes with somebody, and you can de-escalate. You can totally change somebody's mood in 8 minutes. So
mm,
when there's something serious to talk about, it's the, do you have 8 minutes? And we know what that means. It's like, okay, absolutely, we have 8 minutes. And we also have the deal of, where I have time for you. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I
mhm,
have time for you. Yes.
mhm.
You tell me you need me, I'm there, for whatever it is. So, and I think it's important to have those people,
Oh, yeah.
too. And that's okay. You're not burdensome. That's what friendship is. That's what connections
Mhm.
are.
Yeah. They're
Yeah.
that person for you, but you're also possibly that person for them.
That's right.
It's not a one-way street.
That's right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we forget sometimes because when when we're being that friend, we don't see ourselves necessarily as that.
Mhm.
We feel like we're doing dump, dump, dump,
Mhm.
and but we don't realize we're also taking that
Right.
pressure from our friends
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
meantime. So it's hard to remember that
Yes.
sometimes. Yeah.
Yes. How many conversations have we had where it's like, oh, I feel so much better after talking to you because you've just
Oh,
had all this
yes.
stuff, just, all these little things just build
Yeah.
up, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed and frustrated.
Well,
And
that
it's like,
was the last lunch we
yeah,
had before
it
Christmas.
was.
We were talking
Yeah.
and she's like, "So how are things?" And I'm like, "Bleh.
Yeah.
This is how things are."
Yeah.
Bleh. And you were like, "Oh, wow,
Mhm.
that's a
Mhm.
lot.
Mhm.
Can I come over and help
Yep.
clean your house?"
Yep.
And you know what? Things have been so much better.
Good.
So I
Yeah.
was stuck,
Yes.
like physically frozen and stuck,
Yes.
and I vomited all of my words at
She
you
did.
and ate all the queso,
We
and
sure did. Yes.
then the house happened, and
Yeah.
now I'm like, I'm not stuck
Yes.
where I was. I'm not
Mhm.
frozen, and
Mhm.
and I'm some. We deal with this
Mhm.
daily,
Mhm.
and I still have to remind myself, don't forget to take care of you.
That's right. Oh, I'm the best at telling other people how to self-care and everything
Mhm,
else. And then I like, man, why am I like wiped out and why, I don't have
mm,
any energy and all of these things because I don't take my own advice a lot of times. So
yeah.
I try to unplug from things of not working while trying to watch a favorite show, or something that's okay just to I can spend this hour watching TV and that's okay. I love music. That's my
Mhm.
therapy, that's okay
Well,
to
and rest is
turn
a
it on.
requirement. It's
Yes.
not something you earn.
That's right.
And
That's right.
I'm still learning that too.
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm,
Once you
Mhm.
get your sleep pattern down, everything feels a lot better when you get the 7 to 8 hours of sleep and all
or
that.
Mhm.
being able to sleep at all
Yes.
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
such a big difference.
Yeah. When you wake up and you're like, what, what time is it? Is it really that time? And I haven't woken up. Feels
Hmm.
amazing. Yes. Yes, for sure.
Let's talk about your journey, uh, Melissa.
Okay. In 2006, I lost my sister to suicide. And at that time in 2006, there wasn't anybody for me to connect with. In fact, I had never known anybody who'd lost anybody to suicide before. So I felt very much on an island, and I know a lot of people feel that way the more I've connected. That you just feel totally isolated and you're scared to talk about it because you're scared to have your loved one judged. That was the
Hmm.
hardest thing for
Hmm.
me. Um, So it took about 5 years to even really start telling people how she had passed away.
Mhm.
And I was experiencing this, they'd ask how she passed, and well, she died by suicide. And it was the most uncomfortable interaction from that point on, where I found myself comforting other people
Mm.
because they were uncomfortable with the subject matter,
Right.
instead of my loss. And I also noticed that, there's a lot of people who are, well intended. And, suicide, there is a lot of, questions and unanswered questions and things. And so
Oh,
people
yeah.
ask you things that are very intrusive and they want to know
Oh, yeah.
details on things. And so people I noticed were focusing on, how she died instead of how she lived. And so I started focusing. That kind of made me go even more into my shell of, okay, well, I'm not going to tell anybody else, because
Mhm.
it's too stressful for me. I'm not getting support from anybody, and I can't relate to anybody.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until moving back to Emporia in 2013 that I wanted to try to connect somehow, but trying to research any type of suicide prevention groups, or they just didn't exist. They didn't exist, and it wasn't until 2015. It was just a happenstance situation at our Lyon County Fair, of all places, going through the exhibits, and there was this table that was suicide prevention, and they had a suicide loss support group.
Where were they from?
They were a national organization, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And I probably walked back and forth that table where I see people that do that to us too, of getting the nerve to go up. So I snuck over there and was able, the two ladies, they were distracted and like grabbed an information sheet and scurried off.
Mhm.
And they held a support group. It was once a month. And every month I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to go. Nope. Talk myself out of it.
Was that group here before you?
It was. Yeah,
Okay.
it was. And I was scared to go because my knowledge of a support group is everything I've seen on TV. You sit in a circle and you have to share your story. And I definitely was not prepared from the interactions I've had with people. And here I was going to walk into a room of strangers, and I
Mhm.
really didn't feel comfortable doing that. And when I finally did get up the nerve to go, this was in 2015. Um, I realized that one of the ladies there, I had gone to high school with her son, and he had died by suicide, and I knew her son very well. So I immediately connected with her
Mhm.
because we had that connection. And then to find out that they were organizing walks, a way for other individuals who had lost a loved one to suicide, or who currently struggled, or took care of somebody that struggled, a way to come together. And did I want to be a part of that? And absolutely. I'd go, wanted to be kind of didn't want to volunteer, but wanted to be around people, but have the option to leave when it became too overwhelming for
Mhm.
me.
That's yeah, makes
Yes,
sense.
yes. And so I did that the first year, and right after that, um, they wanted to know if I wanted to be responsible for organizing the walks, because the individual who was doing it, she no longer needed that. She had worked through her loss and was trying to move forward, and she'd done it for a couple of years, and that wasn't something she needed anymore, which I understood completely, and
Mhm.
I still do. And so I became the person that would organize the Out of the Darkness walk here that we had in Emporia. And it was great to see different community members come together, come as families, come individually, and have that opportunity to meet people that were, going through that journey of loss, that grief, because it's so unique. It's a sudden loss, but it's unlike any other type of sudden loss, that people experience. And I really got active with college students. I was working up at the campus, and I really connected with college students, and I wanted to do something on campus. So I became their campus coordinator. So I organized a campus walk at Emporia State and K State and KU, Pitt State, and Washburn. We had them everywhere
Mm.
that year. It was great. Just giving that opportunity for young adults to come together and community members to come support the young adults, and all of that. So I really enjoyed doing that, but there was just the hindrance of being able to do more.
Mhm.
because of being a national organization. They had their pillars of where, monies could be used, and I understood that. But being from here and living here and knowing the community, and each community was so different, and we had to specialize each walk,
Mhm.
so differently, that I wanted to be able to provide. If we wanted to do different things, we didn't have to ask permission.
Mhm.
We form a board of directors, and here are the ideas that we have. Are they feasible? Number one, can we do it? Can we execute it and such? And so I went to my dad, and I sat down on his couch, and I was like, so I think I want to start a nonprofit. And he says, okay, I don't know how to do that, but I think you need to talk to an accountant. And that's what I did. I called up an accountant, and it started from there in the steps. And then the accountant had a very close friend who was a lawyer who drew up the papers for us, and filed them for us and everything. And we were told it would take a lot longer to get the status. So in the
Yeah.
meantime, I'm contacting Becky. Hey, you want to? I'm going to do this thing. I think I'm going to call it Beacon for Hope. We're going to be a local nonprofit. Do you want to be part of it? And Vicky, who I had met, who I connected with, she was definitely on board. And then I just started asking people that I knew were passionate about mental health. You want to try? I'm
Mhm.
not sure. Didn't even really know what the direction was of it, what
Right.
we wanted to do, but we
Mhm.
wanted to do something. But our status came through super quick, and it was, oh goodness, we need to do an event. So threw together a walk, and
Mhm.
to let people know that I transitioned from national to local, and hey, we're Beacon for Hope, and we're going to be boots on the ground. We want to train people and educate people, because the biggest driving force at Beacon for Hope is I don't want another family to have to go through what my family has gone through and still goes through. You know, there's a lot of myth. Oh, well, your loved one's been gone, for X amount of time. You should be over it by now. And there's days it feels like it was years ago, and there's other days it feels like yesterday. I'm getting the call. So it's with suicide loss, and the more survivors that I started meeting with suicide loss, where they felt like me, you know, they were feeling those things like me, they were having those same interactions. And how can we change the conversation?
Mhm.
How can we save lives?
Mhm.
And we kind of eased into it with our language, and things. We want to,
Mhm.
save lives, we want to connect people. And now it's, we don't want people to die.
Right.
We don't. There's
Absolutely.
resources available.
Mhm.
You can talk about it. It's okay. Um, and my sister was such a private person, and so it's very hard for me to share her with people. And I'm still very protective of her, and I'm getting emotional, because a lot of people still have that curiosity of focus on how she passed, and I want to talk about how she lived.
Mhm.
You talk about the perfectionism. She was an
Mhm.
academic. Oh my goodness. I always thought she should have been a professor because she
Mhm.
was so intelligent. She was that 4.0 student. She was that back in the late 90s. When I was graduating from high school, she was graduating from college. And she went on to get her MBA, and she got it like in 18 months.
Oh wow.
And back then, it took a lot longer to get your MBA. And very successful in the work that she did. Very independent. Oh my goodness, she would go, all over. But when um, she started having issues that were related to her physical health, is how it started, was when depressive episodes would happen because she wasn't able to do the things that she had done before. And watching her go through that for 10 years, 10
Mhm.
surgeries, 10 years, battling that, and all that entailed, every false hope that was given. You just see your loved ones struggle with that. But, in 2006, we weren't educated like we were
Mhm.
now. We weren't looking for signs, subtle signs, and those, types of things. We
Mhm.
weren't hearing, things when they weren't directly being said, that was an indication, that she was having suicidal ideation and stuff. So definitely have learned a lot, have self-educated, a lot on that. But, having a place where people feel that they can talk to somebody,
Mhm.
it's, never in my wildest dreams would I ever have thought when I was in college that I'd be, suicide prevention work,
Right.
because I just never struggled with it growing up. It wasn't around me. I did, you know, and now that's all I see everywhere. You know,
It really wasn't around back then either.
it was not.
No.
No, no, no. And in fact, I try to think about, when I was at Emporia State, it was the Quack Shack, right? And that was where you went and you didn't know anybody that went to the Quack Shack, as they called it back then. You barely went to the health side of things, and now it's such a, the wellness center, it's there for your purpose. You don't have to be suicidal, but if you're overwhelmed as a college student, please get the help, early, and such. So, Beacon to me and my parents, it's so um, it's so close to our heart, and I'm so protective of it. So to let other people in to be part of it, I'm very, I don't know you, but I'm gonna let you come into our bubble of this is for my sister and everybody else who has lost a loved one to suicide and struggles and feels alone, and all the grief that you go through, because I still go through the cycles of grief. You just never get over it. You just learn how life is different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best advice that I try to tell people, to be very honest, that um, you do take one day at a time, and you will have the days where you don't want to interact with anybody. For example, any event that we have, the next day, I don't communicate with anybody. I don't, because during the event, it's fun, and we're interacting and all that. And then the next day, it's the kind of the realization for me of why I'm doing that. My sister's not here. Every milestone that my kids have ever hit, she wasn't there, because my son was 4 months old and my daughter was 2. So, they didn't get to
And you get
experience
that
her.
urge to call.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure,
absolutely.
still.
Yeah, absolutely. She was huge in KU Jayhawks, and my son likes the Jayhawks, and so I've taken him to basketball games at Allen Fieldhouse, and I just know that she would have taken him, So all those, they didn't get to see the best of her
Mm-hmm.
and experience that. And with a lot of lost families that I have met, they're just, I mean, you just can't even think, and you can't. And I have a large section of time that after she passed that I don't remember at
Mm-hmm.
all, and I just never will, because it was just so traumatic. And the only thing I can remember being at my parents' house was somebody came over and brought paper products so we wouldn't have to do the dishes. And I thought, what an amazing gift to give someone, because that's the last thing you need to deal with, and that's the only thing I can remember during that time prior to her memorial.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know where we slept, didn't know, who was taking care of the kid, where were the kids sleeping, all these things that you just don't know. And so I my goal with Beacon is to just keep providing that support and that education to people, to know that they are not alone. I want to hear about your person. I do. Tell me about them, you know. And, that was a question that I had gotten for the first time ever in my life, talk to me, tell me about Carrie. And I didn't know what to say, because nobody's ever asked me
Mm-hmm.
that before. And for me to share her with other people, um, yeah, it was hard, but the more I can share with other people, they can share, their loved one,
Mm-hmm.
and such. So, yeah.
So why the name Beacon for Hope?
So my sister loved lighthouses. Oh my goodness, she loved them. Lighthouses and cardinals. So I knew that it had to be a lighthouse. I
Mm-hmm.
just knew it had to be a lighthouse. And, coming up with a name for anything is so difficult. And it just
Mm-hmm.
dawned on me one day, okay, a lighthouse beacon, it's a beacon of hope, so how about a beacon for hope?
Mm-hmm.
Here's your light. Here are people that care, people that will listen and will guide you with the resource you need for help. So kind of tie it all in.
Mm-hmm.
Was the
Yeah, that light in the dark to help guide you
Yes,
to safety.
that's right.
I mean, the lighthouse.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
It is hard to name anything. I mean, especially something that means so much to you.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I wanted her, you know, she would hate the fact that there's an organization because of her. Oh goodness, she would just would not like that at all. So, I get a little pleasure, out of knowing that, that it would bother her because the big joke growing up was she was supposed to be an only child, and here I came 4 years later, and such. But she was never, we were 4 years apart, and that was just enough to be different, to be totally different, things we were into, but we liked so much of the same things. And she took me everywhere with her. I wasn't a pest or anything, but we liked doing the same things, and we did them together, and such. And then when she started really struggling and started to pull back, that was very hard to adjust to. But at the same time, my daughter, she was only
I
2,
was gonna say you're new mom.
yeah, I'm a new mom, and then I have my son on top of that, and moving to a different town, and all of these things. So I wasn't reaching out. The guilt that I felt and still feel, from you always say life gets in the way, right? Or life's been running me over, lately, so I haven't been able to reach out for lunch or whatever, just to check in. So I'm very conscious of doing that, with people around me, especially if I haven't heard from them in a while. I am the drop by person. If you don't answer and I know you're struggling, I'm going to drop by because I need to physically see you and make sure you're okay. We don't have to talk. We don't have to talk about what's wrong, but just know that I'll be right there if you want to talk, sort of thing. My best friend will tell you how I hunted her down at a Dollar General store, one time because she she was feeling overwhelmed, and it was her granddaughter's birthday, and so I went by her work and her car wasn't there, so I was keeping her on the phone, trying to figure out where she was, and she's like, "I'm getting this balloon aired up," and I was like, "Okay, where are places that air up balloons?" And I was like, "Ooh, Dollar General." So I went there, and she and I literally walked around the corner and ran into each other. She just burst into tears. I'm like, "Well, something's wrong. I just want to make sure that you are okay." Um, yeah. Yes.
Something that struck me about when you were telling your story, um, you saw the table with the information in 2013,
Mm-hmm.
and you went to the meeting in 2015. So it took you 2 years
Mm-hmm.
to work up
Mm-hmm.
the nerve
Yes.
to go to the meeting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it's not an immediate
It's
thing
not.
for some things.
It's not.
And I love that
Yes.
you still 2 years later you were finally able to be like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this time
Right.
I'm actually going to go through with it and do it. And that
Right.
you hadn't abandoned the idea entirely after like 1 or 2 months of not
Right.
being able to go.
Yes.
And you were actually did
Mm-hmm.
finally find the strength and the nerve to do it.
And one thing I was really stressed about, I wanted to go to that walk, but so I did research on what it was like because I'd never gone to a walk before. And one of the things that they did was they handed you beads that identified your type of loss. And to put a color on myself where people would know, number one, was overwhelming. But it was also reassuring, though, when I saw other people walking around with my same color beads. I didn't have to talk to that person, but I knew that they knew how I felt. And in fact, I didn't meet anybody who had lost a loved one, a sibling, until I was able to go to Washington D.C. To talk to advocate on Capitol Hill, which was great for 3 days. And it was actually a cousin of mine who I had just met from Missouri. She had lost her brother, and she was the first person who had lost a sibling that I could connect with. And she was with the Missouri chapter while I represented, part of the Kansas chapter.
Interesting how your lives paralleled a little bit.
Yeah. So then after that, it was it's like, okay, this is what I want to do. I can see where it can affect change. It can be positive in somebody's life, but I want to do more. And we did, we were able to do some presentations, and things like that. But with Beacon, we're able to do so much more. We're not limited to, if people need a resource developed, okay, we'll develop that for you.
Yeah, so you don't have to go through channels
Exactly.
and time
Right.
that
Yes.
you're able to make that decision and make it
Right,
happen.
right. Or, we talk about different events to target different populations and how are unique ways. Okay, well, let's try this.
Mhm.
Let's see what people
And
are.
some things don't work that
That's
well,
right. Yeah.
and some things do
Yeah.
a little better. I mean, we're
Right.
learning as we go
Exactly.
because it's yes, there are organizations out there. We are not the only
Hmm.
suicide prevention organization, but we're having to teach ourselves pretty
Exactly.
much
Yes.
how to do this.
Right, right. And Kenny and I talk a lot about law enforcement, how we really want to make a great impact with law enforcement and the support of law enforcement, and not only in the community they serve, but I know that's how Kenny thinks a lot of the times of, the community he's serving. So his mentality is that way. My mentality is your fellow officers,
Mhm.
And so we talk about resources
Mhm.
and I ask him, well, if you were struggling, what resource would you want a fellow officer to give you, or what are you comfortable in giving? Because I want to ensure that our
Mhm.
first responders who are going out, from the dispatcher who's taking the call to the officer that's responding to a call, that
Mhm.
they're being supported
Right.
as well. And I think a lot of times different professions are being get kind of lost in oh well you have the training, yeah, you have the crisis training and all of that, but the personal impact that it has on you to you responding to these calls, especially if you have the lived experience yourself of
Mhm.
struggling, and the families and the impact that it has, on families and such. I went
Mhm.
on a ride along with Kenny, and we popped I mean, so many different things, and by the fourth thing we were on, I was still reeling from the second thing
Mhm.
that really affected me,
Mhm.
I don't
and
remember what it was.
yeah, and me, I was just like, how do you switch? So you don't have time to process. You're switching to the
Right.
next, person you need to assist. But after that
Mhm.
shift is over, where's that positive support to
Right.
decompress?
Right. Being a helper, which is, I'm sure, what you do is you help people when you don't have the resources to give them to help. That's got to be um, something that wears on you. Um, and if it happens
You
over
know,
and over, it
Mhm.
has to kind of get heavy after a while.
you definitely learn how to put it in a box. It might like your first few years, it might you don't know if it's something that you've never been around, and
Mhm.
this and the you definitely learn how to put it in a box, and that's something I've learned over the years. But it does, every once in a while, one call, especially suicide, you know, will affect me, and um, I remember one incident that was the person was around the age of my daughters, and that was, you know, it just my sergeant at the time, he's like, "You good?" Like, "Yeah, I'm good."
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it was good that he checked in with you, even if.
Yeah, well, yeah, he could see on my face. He goes, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." And but then later I was like, "Hey, man, that kind of screwed with my head because that person's my kid's age."
Mhm.
And but over the years, you see like you see so much of it that you try to not think about it.
Mhm.
And I know it can be dangerous if you don't address it. It could be,
Mhm.
detrimental to your mental health
Mhm.
if that box gets full, and
Definitely.
you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, it all talking about it is pretty much the only thing that's
Yeah.
gonna
Mhm.
help,
It is. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. And
Yep.
I've noticed that since Beacon has been formed, that for my family it's healing for us
Mhm.
to be able to connect in different ways. My dad is, the greatest supporter who, comes to every event. I just love it. And I was like, oh, there's dad. He's
Mhm.
not here yet. And sort of thing. Just to be, part of it. And I think it's healing for us because we see the positive impact that it's having on
Mhm.
it's overwhelming for some individuals if they come to an event too soon, if they've had a loss
Mhm.
or something too soon, um, but to see the support that we are, because I feel like Emporia is very unique in we are rural technically, but we have so many amazing people and resources and organizations with resources
Mhm.
that are truly here to help, to help you financially, help you, with your resume. Here's, food, insecurity things, here's, shelter and
Mhm.
those types of organizations. But you have to know who they are to
Right.
reach out.
Mhm.
So that's one
Absolutely.
thing that I enjoy is when those organizations are able to join us at
Mhm.
our events to be able to dispense that information. So it doesn't add another layer to the already stress that everybody's going to, and then not knowing where to turn.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, and that's one of the things I appreciate about so many of our events is that they're not solemn.
right.
I mean, there's a time for solemnity,
Yes.
but we celebrate being alive
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
focus on positive things. And it's not, yeah, we do have a memory walk and we
Mm-hmm.
remember the people, but it's not all about the sorrow.
Right.
We try to find happiness
Yes.
and positivity
Yes.
in what we're doing.
Yes. And that's what I really like too is the um, trying to get people excited about suicide prevention. When I go do a talk, everybody in the room has the potential to save a life. Here are things to listen for, risk factors, protective factors. In 20 minutes, I can, give you kind of something for your toolkit,
Hmm.
with the clientele you're working with, your peers, just anybody. But attending something where, it's intimidating. It's very intimidating to walk up to
Hmm.
something, like that, where you're kind of exposing yourself. You're very vulnerable.
Hmm.
Um, but when you see other people being vulnerable, it allows you to help somebody else. So it's that constant paying forward just by sharing your lived experience. But our walk is the one event where yes, we do we read the names of those lost too soon, but we also want to recognize, individuals who have struggled that are still here. That's
Hmm.
a new part of what we do.
Right.
And we have a moment of silence for those that we have lost. Our other events, they're just, trying to instill hope. If you ask somebody, what's your definition of hope? It's hard
Hmm.
to, well, you want to be hopeful. Right. What does that mean? It means something different to everybody.
It definitely does, and
Mhm.
I think with our society now that everything's at our fingertip,
Mhm.
and you're seeing all this bad news, it's hard to be hopeful sometimes.
Oh, yeah. It is.
And I found that if I just disconnect from the internet for a good while, my mental health is a lot better.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the interesting dichotomy of like what I was saying before, where you could connect, where we connected with people that had experiences that we did that don't live anywhere near us, where
Mhm.
we could talk to. But
Mhm.
then the other side is you've got 24/7 bombardment of everything wrong going on
Yes.
in the world.
Uh-huh.
And um,
Yeah, and the news cycle is not
the news
it's not
cycle.
designed for positivity.
No.
It's all, and it's all negative stuff, no matter
Yeah,
what they're
and
talking about.
every year seems like there's more and more. And
Mhm.
I know that that's not necessarily the case. It's just, it makes us aware of
Yes.
all of it.
Mhm.
When back in 1800, there's horrible things going on here that I might only hear a snippet of years after it
Right.
happens.
Yes. Yes. Mhm.
So, I mean, the world has always had these things happening. It's just, it's 24/7. Like you
Mhm.
said, the
Yeah.
news cycle, all about it. And every little thing we're going to talk to death.
Yes. Yes.
And
Mhm.
it does, it could get
Mhm.
overwhelming. And you have to step back and take time away from that
Mhm.
for your mental health.
You do.
Absolutely.
You definitely do. And, there needs to be more, availability of self-care tips,
Yeah.
of when
Like
things
how to do that or the need to do
yes,
that.
the
And
importance of doing that,
mhm,
um, like I know when there is a suicide of a celebrity,
mm,
you'll
mhm,
see resources are going to be advertised for a couple of weeks after that,
right.
and there is a solid increase into 988 centers, which is great because people are reaching out,
Mhm,
but then what happens after that 2 weeks? Then the news cycle goes back to the other negative things instead of the supportive things,
mhm,
because a lot of the conversations are, well, you didn't know them personally, so how does that impact you?
Oh,
Well, you
yeah.
know what? But the music that they made, they got me through this tough time. I listened to them.
Oh, yeah. The double whammy of Chris Cornell
Yes.
and Lincoln Park.
Mm-hmm.
It knocked me for a
Yeah.
loop.
Yeah.
I didn't know those guys.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know who I was if they ran me over with their car.
Right.
But
Mhm.
their art, their
Mhm.
passion
Mhm.
spoke to
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
And Chester, that's yeah.
Yes.
I'm so
Yes.
bad with names. My memory's so bad. But it was like, wow, okay, take
Because a lot of
that.
people start comparing, well, they had everything, right? That's what we see.
Mm-hmm.
They had
Yep.
money, they had fame.
They had talent.
Yes,
And
but nobody knows the struggles they had to get there,
right.
what they sacrificed, what they gave up,
And
the hard work.
your brain doesn't care.
That's right.
I mean,
Mhm.
No.
No.
no,
Mm-mm.
it doesn't care how many people love you.
That's right.
It
Yeah.
the chemicals are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's an interesting
Yeah.
thing to see too. But then there's a ripple
Yes.
when that happens
Yes. Mm-hmm.
too.
There is a ripple. Yes. Yes. I'm very excited this year for all of our events because we have a lot. We have 12, which is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Some are more intensive than others,
Sure.
but the message is all the same that you're not alone and help is available. Just trying to connect with individuals who may not otherwise reach out in a way and participating in an event that interests them. That's part of their self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Helping individuals identify their self-care so when they
Right.
start feeling overwhelmed and such. But
I think it like or you're like Beacon for Hope is a good thing because I think the message that Beacon gives is that you don't have to go to a professional to talk about what's bothering you. And, just talking about it and isn't enough. And I think a lot of people think you know that that oh, I'm not qualified to talk about it.
right,
Mm-hmm.
You
yes,
know
yes,
you don't have to
yeah.
be qualified like us. We're not qualified to be on this podcast. So none of us have. I don't. Do you have a psychiatry
I
degree?
have a psychology degree.
Psychology,
Yeah,
yeah, but
I don't.
yeah,
I
I have an
don't.
English degree.
I don't even have a college
Yeah.
degree.
yeah.
So
But we all have lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yes. The greatest teacher, lived experience.
experience over degrees any day.
Absolutely, yeah,
I
yeah.
think I was telling you earlier that the amount of time, the amount of people that police officers are talk to when they're in crisis, is 10 times the amount that a professional counselor
Mm. Oh,
does
for
because
sure. Yeah.
by the time they get to the counselor, they're thinking they're calm and they're
More
more
rational.
rational, and then the they see them at their best,
Mhm.
most of the time,
Yeah.
but we see them at their worst,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
not just
Yeah.
police, but you,
Oh yeah. Mhm.
those that recognize what people are going through,
Yeah.
you know, see them at
Mhm.
their worst.
Mhm.
Yeah. I had a friend who was having difficulties once. They were younger. They're younger, um, with wanting to self harm,
Mhm.
and I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to fix that.
Mhm.
But I told them, I was like, here's what we're gonna do. When you get that urge, you're gonna text me or you're gonna call me any time of day or night,
Mhm.
and we're just gonna talk it through. And
Yeah.
hopefully by the time we're done, you've moved past it or
Mhm.
something. I can't counsel you, but I'm
Mhm.
here.
Right.
And you don't have to be alone.
Exactly.
You don't
Yes.
have to be alone.
Mhm.
And I think that's means more than anything.
I agree.
Um,
Mhm.
so many of us feel alone.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of that isolation is even more so post COVID.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the need to connect,
Yes.
to matter, to actually feel like it's important to someone somewhere, something somehow that you're here, um, means so much. And um, I haven't had a text from this person or a call for quite a few years.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But I did get them.
Mm-hmm.
3 in the morning, I would get them and be texting away with them and like, okay, so talk to me. What's
Right.
going
What's
on?
going on?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just talk to me. I'm here. And I think that you don't have to be trained for that. You just have to care.
You have to
Yeah,
care.
you have to care.
Absolutely. You have to
Mhm.
care. Yeah.
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
to have some empathy.
Yes, empathy and be
Mhm.
genuine and authentic, and that you're not there to fix the problem. You're there to
Right.
listen and
Yeah.
navigate it with
Mhm.
them. And, try to, if there's a resource, hey, guide them to the resource, to the professional
Mhm.
that can take it from there. But just knowing you have that person to reach out to
Right.
can be so soothing
Mhm.
to know if I
I
need
can
you.
sit with you in this difficulty even if we can't fix it.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Let's try to weather the storm
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes.
And sometimes that's all people want.
And
Absolutely.
that's all they need in
Yeah.
that moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because so many times the crisis is in the moment,
Yes.
and if you can get through the moment,
Mhm.
then you've averted the crisis and they can move on. And maybe the crisis will come up again.
Right?
Maybe it won't.
Maybe it won't. That's right. Yeah. Maybe it
But
won't.
yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Hope Collective. We hope today's conversation has inspired hope, understanding, and connection. We've included helpful resources in the description of this episode. You can also visit hopelinks.org/resources for a list of support services and organizations ready to assist.